Greetings from CBC Studio A, and welcome to another episode of Discernment Digest, where we offer a digest of news items that present questions of obvious concern for those of us holding to a biblical worldview, and then we focus on biblical teaching on a particular topic designed to inform and build up Christians. Now, I started an overview of biblical counseling last week at listener request, and I plan to continue, but I'm not at all sure I'll be able to get to it today, as this week was a busy one with much on which to comment. Those matters include some noise about a dress worn at a concert, a reality TV road trip over 7 months by a member of the president's cabinet, and then it moves from the relatively mundane to the more interesting because more concerning, namely the continued evidence of the president's unchecked power in the way it appears he is enriching himself, mixing stock purchases with executive decisions, and the establishment of what I can only describe as a slush fund for supporters who he says have been victims of political persecution, something I said in last week's episode may be on the horizon, and it was announced, in fact, that very day, last Monday, May the 18th. The first item is an example of discerning when a writer is doing a kind of sleight of hand on an issue. Unfortunately, it involves an issue that is really morally sick, so I won't spend much time on it overall. I'll just mention what the issue is and where the sleight of hand comes in as an example for the future where discernment is required. The Atlantic magazine, to which I subscribe, along with the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Dispatch. And if you can only afford one, I recommend you get the Dispatch. I mentioned that last week. It's a right of center publication. You can sign up for the Dispatch's morning email, though, for free. Anyway, The Atlantic ran an article last Monday titled, "Olivia Rodrigo's Baby Doll Dress Was a Rorschach Test." Now, I have to admit, I don't know who Olivia Rodrigo goes, and I'm actually just fine with that. But it said, quote, "The singer Olivia Rodrigo held an intimate concert in Barcelona while wearing a certain outfit: a floral baby doll dress, pink bloomers, and knee-high leather boots. The getup almost immediately set off an online maelstrom. Some commentators accused her of dressing like a sex baby. Others defended her right to dress however she pleases. Rodrigo, though, appeared to have specific references in mind. In a recent interview, she noted that she's currently inspired by artists such as Kat Belland, not sure if I pronounced that last name correctly, and Courtney Love, who paired baby doll dresses with punk rock in the 1990s to repudiate the fetishization of girlhood. But those artists, too, were criticized, and then she quotes some of the negative reviews. But here's the shift I want you to notice. Quote, "Though some people might associate them squarely with girlhood, the history of the billowy dress is far more convoluted. It has traveled over the centuries between kid and adult closets. This fluidity reflects how kiddie and grown clothes have never had strictly differentiated styles, fashion historians tell me, and how the line between the two has constantly shifted." So the writer talks about a recent example, says then some might associate it with girlhood, but then shifts to times when that may not have been the connotation, which helps us not at all as it relates to Ms. Rodrigo because, friends, context determines meaning. And the context of her get-up, as the article called it, is not from centuries ago, but from today and from recent history of just a few decades. And by that standard, she's wearing something obscene. And Christian people should have a visceral reaction against it and ignore the rest of what a progressive writer for the liberal Atlantic is trying to push. That's just a brief word on the world of our often immoral culture, but there's more to address in the area of politics, as this week was just chock full of matters that we need to be aware of and wise regarding. Sean Duffy is our Secretary of Transportation. He was a congressman from 2011 to 2019 when he resigned and became a regular on the Fox News channel. His wife is Rachel Campo Duffy, who's a co-host of Fox and Friends Weekend. And Sean, Rachel, and their 9 children took a 7-month reality TV vacation, mostly over weekends. But it was paid for by companies that Sean's department regulates, companies like Boeing and Toyota and CRH. That's a provider of building materials for highways and other critical infrastructure, as well as the American Bus Association. And even of those donor companies that do not have a relationship with the Department of Transportation, every major sponsor of the Duffy's road trip has at least one policy issue before the Trump administration. When completed, that series is to air on YouTube. Now, regarding the president's purchase of stocks, followed by favorable treatment of the companies that are behind those stocks, in January, Trump bought hundreds of thousands of dollars of stock in NVIDIA. Then a week later, his Commerce Department approved the sale of NVIDIA chips to China. In January, Trump bought between $50,000 and $100,000 worth of stock in a company called AMD. 1 week after he bought it, his Commerce Department approved AMD doing business in China. In February, Trump bought millions of dollars worth of stock in Dell. 9 days later, in a speech in Georgia, he went off script to tell the crowd, quote, "Go out and buy a Dell computer." In March, Trump reportedly bought Thermo Fisher stock, and then he went to Thermo Fisher on an official presidential visit and praised the company. That same day, Trump bought hundreds of thousands of dollars of stock in Apple. And the same day that he bought the stock, he did another event where he singled out Apple and its chief executive officer for praise, saying, quote, "Apple is a great company." After that, he bought Micron stock. The very next day, he called into the Fox News channel and tells them Micron is one of the hottest companies. CNBC reported that Trump made 7 separate purchases of hundreds of thousands of dollars of Palantir stock. He then went on social media and praised Palantir. Now, there were stories this week about how the president's sons have raked in money in the mere 18 months of this second term, something about which I think we may well hear in the year ahead, and something on which I will keep an eye. You may recall the claim that the Biden family was enriching itself during Biden's time as president, and it was something that Trump claimed for years, calling them the Biden crime family. Now, I know that at minimum, Hunter Biden is a real piece of work who would likely be in jail now had his father not pardoned him before leaving office, something that Biden repeatedly said he would not do for his own family, given the obvious conflict of interest. This past Thursday, there was a hastily called meeting of Republican senators with Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche. It was called because the senators were very upset about 2 things. First, the announcement on Monday of the Weaponization Fund for so-called victims of mistreatment by the legal system because of their political views. And then secondly, President Trump's Tuesday endorsement of a man named Ken Paxton over incumbent Texas Senator John Cornyn for the Senate primary election next Tuesday in that state. I'll deal with the second of those first. Who is Ken Paxton? He is currently the Attorney General in the state of Texas, but he's running to be one of the 2 U.S. senators from that state. Now, 2 things are interesting about that. One, he's running against a sitting Republican Senator John Cornyn, who's been in the Senate since 2002, is very well liked by his Republican colleagues. He's a former Texas Supreme Court justice who more than once has been mentioned for nomination to the U.S. Supreme Court. And secondly, Ken Paxton has a checkered past that may make it difficult in the November election if he wins the nomination to run next week. An article on that race from this past week said, "By choosing Paxton, the president is rewarding his and his base's unwavering devotion. He is likely also guaranteeing Paxton a primary victory over Cornyn. And in so doing, Trump may have cemented a set of very difficult circumstances for his party. If Paxton wins on Tuesday, Democrats will probably be better positioned to win statewide in Texas than they've been in the past 40 years. And then the article goes on to talk about that checkered past of Ken Paxton. It says, in the beginning, there was a pen, a $1,000 Mont Blanc, to be specific, the writing instrument of choice for celebrities, heads of state, and other kinds of people who recognize the cultural cachet of a customizable gold nib. Paxton apparently knows a good pen when he sees one, and in 2013, then State Senator Paxton did see one next to a metal detector at the Collin County Courthouse, where a fellow attorney had accidentally left it behind. Paxton picked it up and pocketed it. Later, after a call from an officer, Paxton returned the pen to its rightful owner. It had been a misunderstanding, a simple mistake, a Paxton spokesperson said. But that didn't stop the ads. This is Attorney General Ken Paxton rummaging through the metal detector trays and stealing that $1,000 pen, the narrator says in one ad from 2018. And Texas hadn't seen anything yet. Over the next decade, Paxton would build a rap sheet of legal and ethical entanglements so long and complex that it's difficult to quickly sum it up, but the author says, I'll try. In 2015, his first year as Attorney General, Paxton was charged with defrauding investors in a tech company. The charges were dismissed after Paxton agreed to do community service and take an ethics class. In 2020, some of Paxton's aides reported their boss to the FBI, accusing him of using his office to benefit a particular donor. Paxton later fired those staffers who sued, alleging retaliation. The FBI investigated Paxton, but the Justice Department ultimately declined to prosecute. A judge did find that the Attorney General had violated the State Whistleblower Act, and Texas paid the aides $6.6 million. In late 2020, Paxton became a star player in Trump's Stop the Steal attempt to overturn the results of the presidential election that year by suing to invalidate the results in 4 states that Joe Biden had won. By 2023, Paxton was the subject of a full-blown impeachment investigation based in part on the previously mentioned allegations. Ultimately, the Texas House, including the majority of Republicans, voted to, in fact, impeach him. Paxton was eventually acquitted by the Texas Senate with Trump's help. But during the Senate trial, sordid details about his personal life spilled out, including witness testimony that Paxton had cheated on his wife, who is herself a Texas state senator, Angela Paxton. Later in 2025, Angela announced she was divorcing Paxton on, quote, biblical grounds, which the article says is the Baptist way of saying that Ken is at it again. We should note that Paxton has denied allegations of an affair. Now, I mentioned that Cornyn is well liked by his Senate colleagues who hate to see him go, but Trump's endorsement of Paxton nearly guarantees that he's going to win this Tuesday's primary and will be the Republican nominee in November, where it's not guaranteed he'll win given his past problems and the fact that he's running against an unusual Democrat in Texas, a man named James Tallarico. Tallarico is, yes, your usual Democrat progressive, but he's also a seminary graduate who knows how to talk Bible and Christianese, and he's extremely well-spoken. So Republican senators are upset that Cornyn will not be with them next year, but also that a Democrat might be, as they believe Cornyn would certainly defeat Tallarico. And in the election in Texas, it's going to have ripple effects because money from the Republican Senatorial Campaign Fund is going to need to be poured into Texas and so diverted from other state races. So Todd Blanche, the acting attorney general, got an earful about that from Republican senators on Thursday, but also about that weaponization fund. I'll get to that in a minute, but first there was this past Tuesday, another Senate primary in which another Republican senator, this one from Louisiana, lost in that election because Trump endorsed a different candidate. Now, why did Trump do that? To Bill Cassidy, the current senator from Louisiana who was up for re-election. By the way, U.S. senators serve 6-year terms. So why did he do that to Cassidy in Louisiana and to Cornyn in Texas? Why does Trump want those two senators from his own party to be replaced? Well, in the case of Cornyn, Trump has stated that he did not endorse him because Cornyn failed to support him, Trump, quote, when times were tough. Trump has said, quote, John was very late in backing me for president. He said that Cornyn is a good man with whom he had worked well, but that Paxton is a, quote, true MAGA warrior who has always delivered for Texas. Now, I make no prediction about who will win in Texas in November, but Texas is an extremely red state, so it's going to be very hard for the Democrat to win. But he has a legitimate shot, something no one thought would be the case, and the outcome could determine which party controls the Senate next year after the elections in November. The other Senate race that Trump has weighed in on is that one in the Louisiana Senate primary, where the incumbent, Bill Cassidy, lost, much like Cornyn is expected to lose next week. Trump endorsed another candidate, which was the political seal of death for Cassidy. Now, in Cassidy's case, the animosity toward him from Trump is more substantive than that toward John Cornyn, because in Cassidy's case, Cassidy did, to remove Trump from office in January of 2021 after Trump was impeached in that month for inciting the attack on our Capitol on January 6th. I think that Cassidy, like many others at that time, thought that Trump would never be heard from again, frankly, politically, and so that there was no political cost to voting to remove him. But we now know that, incredibly, Trump rose from the political dead and he won re-election in 24, and he can now exercise his power to exact revenge. He's done so on people like James Comey, who the Justice Department is prosecuting in a case I mentioned in previous weeks that has no chance of moving forward. And he's done so now successfully with Bill Cassidy, who will not be in the Senate next year. And this is despite Cassidy going out of his way to get in Trump's good graces last year when Cassidy voted to confirm Robert Kennedy Jr. to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services, despite Cassidy's extremely strong misgivings about Kennedy's views on vaccines, for instance. You see, Senator Bill Cassidy is also a medical doctor, but he voted to confirm Kennedy, but it did not buy him Trump's favor. These next 2.5 years of Trump's presidency will be interesting in many ways, one of which is to see what kind of relationship he's going to have with the Congress. You see, Bill Cassidy and John Cornyn are going to remain senators until next January. In those 7 months remaining, they have no reason to be loyal now to Trump, and Cassidy has already become an outspoken critic, and Cornyn may also after he loses on Tuesday. And there's another Republican senator, Tom Tillis from North Carolina, who's not running for re-election, and so he feels no need to be beholden to Trump. And he's been the most ardent Republican opponent of Trump for the entirety of Trump's second term so far. In addition, two others, Lisa Murkowski of Alaska and Susan Collins of Maine, they're Republicans, but their seats are safe, and so they too have been free to contradict the president without fear of political cost. And then after November, if the Republicans lose the Senate majority, it will mean the end for Trump's agenda. Now, if the president's approval rating is as low as reported, in the low 40s, why does his endorsement mean so much? Well, it's because those endorsements are for the primary election in states like Louisiana and Texas. And the truth is this: the people who vote in the primaries are not the normies, but the extremists of both parties. The fact is, a very low percentage of registered voters show up for primary elections, unfortunately, which means a relatively small number of very motivated activists who do show up, they end up determining who will be on the ballot in November for the Senate, but also for president every fourth year. It's how Trump won the primaries in 2016. The first time he ran, and he was campaigning in 2015 and 2016, he had 16 other Republicans campaigning against him. But he won the primaries. It's how the Republicans failed to win the Senate back in 2010 when Barack Obama and the Democrats were quite unpopular in Obama's first 2 years, but the Republicans in their primaries elected crazy candidates who did not stand a chance in that year's November elections. If our electoral process is going to improve, more normal people need to vote in the primaries to select better people for the general elections. And so I encourage all listening to vote in the primaries and the general elections. Okay, that brings me to that so-called Weaponization Fund, the other issue that had Republican senators' hair on fire when they met with Todd Blanche this past Thursday. And I think I'll end with that issue for this week. I mentioned in last week's episode that this was a real possibility, and it was in fact announced that very day, last Monday, the 18th. Now, if you were able to listen last week, you know that it arises because Trump had sued the Internal Revenue Service in January because a contractor for the IRS had leaked his past tax returns to the press in 2019, along with the returns of over 400,000 other individuals and businesses. Yes, that's right, over 400,000 other. The contractor who did this was prosecuted, rightly, and he spent 5 years in jail. But in January of this year, Trump sued the IRS for that 2019 leak. But there was a problem since the IRS now works under Trump, as does the Department of Justice, which would be responsible to defend not Trump, but the IRS. The judge before whom the case was filed acknowledged the problem and appeared ready to dismiss it last week when, on Monday, a settlement was reached. Trump withdrew his lawsuit, but that took the judge out of the process, and that's a very important point because it left now two agencies that both work for Trump negotiating with each other. And, surprise, they reached an agreement between themselves that sets up something that the president wanted, a fund with money from taxpayers to pay supporters of President Trump as compensation for what they and he believe is their mistreatment in our courts of law. Now, before we look at some of the specifics of that most unusual arrangement, get this. The settlement also includes language that says the Trumps cannot be prosecuted or audited for any past tax crimes. You heard that right. Last Tuesday, an addendum to the Monday agreement was released that shields Donald Trump, his family, and his businesses from being prosecuted or audited for past tax issues. According to that one-page addendum signed by Acting Attorney General Blanche, the federal government is, quote, forever barred and precluded, end quote, from pursuing or prosecuting any civil or criminal tax claims against Donald Trump, his adult sons, Donald Jr. and Eric Trump, the Trump Organization, and all related family trusts, affiliates, and subsidiaries. Now, all of this is unprecedented, and I'm not a lawyer, but probably illegal. It'll be challenged, and so it may never be put into effect. But the mere fact that it's been tried is troubling in the extreme. One reason the family and its businesses may want such protection is because when those past tax returns were illegally leaked in 2019, what they showed is that supposed billionaire Donald Trump paid, now wait for it, $750 in federal tax the year that he was first elected president, 2016, and he paid another $750 in the following year. He paid zero income taxes at all in 10 of the previous 15 years, largely because he reported losing much more money than he made. The returns, which extended over more than 2 decades, revealed struggling properties, vast write-offs, an audit battle, and hundreds of millions in debt coming due. Now, this issue came up in the 2016 campaign in one of the televised debates where Hillary Clinton questioned his tax avoidance and whether it might in fact be tax evasion. The former is legal avoidance, but the latter, evasion, is not. And Trump said, quote, "It shows I'm smart." And I remember thinking when I was watching that and heard that, so what does that make the rest of us who actually pay our fair share? You know that candidates for president throughout my adult life have all voluntarily made their tax returns public in order to show that they have no conflicts of interests were they to be elected. For example, the Bush family was a wealthy political family, and it was important that they disclose their business dealings, and they did. In 2004, in the presidential debate, John Kerry asked President George W. Bush about a lumber company he owned, and Bush looked puzzled and said, "I own a lumber company?" And then he looked at Kerry and quipped, "Want to buy some wood?" Anyway, that brings us to the weird settlement, which instead of Trump suing for the original $10 billion, which he was not going to get, and the case may well not have moved forward at all, instead the IRS and the Department of Justice agreed in a 9-page agreement to set up a fund of nearly $1.8 billion, the proceeds of which will go to people who are aggrieved because they've been mistreated by our justice system and they believe are entitled to compensation. People like, the president has said, the rioters on January 6, 2021 who attacked our Capitol. Those people are patriots, according to the president. And according to Tucker Carlson's Fox special from a few years ago called Patriot Purge, which claimed the rioters were set up by the FBI. So no judge was involved in overseeing or approving this agreement, just 2 agencies that work for the president. The agreement sets up a 5-person committee to oversee the applications for funds and the distributions of those funds. There is no requirement to publish who gets the money, and Trump can fire any of the committee members whenever he wants. Now, from where does the money come? Well, the Justice Department is allocated money by Congress for settlements. And this is simply because Congress does not want to have to vote on every settlement that the Justice Department makes in the many cases that they pursue. And it's Congress who, according to our Constitution, has what's called the power of the purse. They control the money. But they have by law allocated money to a fund to the Justice Department for settlements. And there have been other than funds in which victims have been compensated by the Justice Department. For example, for a Native American tribe during the Obama administration. But the difference between that and this is that it was overseen and approved by a federal judge. This one is done by people who work for the president. And the Justice Department under Trump has already given money over $1 million to the likes of General Michael Flynn, who lied to the FBI, and he pled guilty before a federal judge twice. But he's considered to be a victim and has been compensated previously already as a victim. And this from the party that I have known all my adult life and had voted for all of my adult life, the Republican Party, that has always claimed to be the party of personal responsibility. But now, so many are victims. And that includes, apparently, the rioters on January 6th. Now, mind you, on the first day of President Trump's second term, back in January of 25, the very first day, he pardoned all 1,600 of the January 6 rioters who had been convicted. And yet all of them are now eligible to apply for this money. Just like General Michael Flynn, the family of Ashley Babbitt, one of the rioters, Ashley Babbitt was killed on that day. She was shot. And her family has been given compensation already. Previously, before this latest agreement and fund was set up. And if you want to see who Ashley Babbitt was, she was trying to crawl through a window into the House chamber, and she was repeatedly told that she could not do that and to stop. And she was going in, and one of the officers on the other side shot, and she was killed. Now, there was an investigation done. The Capitol Police, this was a Capitol Police officer who did that, and he was exonerated for what he did. But Ashley Babbitt is considered by many to be a patriot and a hero. Oh, and with this latest fund, I said it was about $1.8 billion. The exact amount in the fund is $1.776 billion. It's an intentional 1776 to remind you that this is a patriotic fund, according to the president. Well, if you have any questions or comments, you can send those to discern@cbctrenton.com. I hope you can listen again next Monday. In the meantime, have a great week serving and discerning.